It was a bright, sunny afternoon at Elite Motors. This wasn't just any car place, it was a super fancy dealership where all the cars sparkled like stars under big, bright lights. The floors were so clean you could see your face in them, and the walls were covered with pictures of fast cars zooming down roads. Everywhere you looked, shiny cars sat waiting, red ones, blue ones, black ones, all super cool and ready for someone to drive them away. The employees were busy, running around like bees in a hive, helping rich customers pick out their dream rides. Some people wanted a big truck, some wanted a speedy sports car, and everyone was smiling because this place felt like a candy store for grown ups who love cars. Then, out of nowhere, a guy walked in. And not just any guy, this was Keanu Reeves. Yep, the Keanu Reeves you know, the one from those awesome movies where he fights bad guys or drives super fast. Kids love him, grown ups love him, even dogs probably love him. But here's the funny part, that day, he didn't look like a movie star at all. No fancy suit, no shiny shoes, no big sunglasses like you see in pictures. Instead, he had on a plain old jacket that looked a little worn out, some scruffy jeans that weren't brand new, and a baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. If you saw him walking down the street, you might think, oh, that's just some regular dude. And that's exactly what everyone at Elite Motors thought too. Keanu stepped inside quietly. His sneakers didn't make a big noise on the shiny floor. He didn't wave or shout or say, "Hey, look at me, I'm famous." Nope, he just kept his head down a little and started looking at the cars. He walked over to a big black truck first, running his hand along the side like he was petting a dog. Then he moved to a bright red sports car, peeking inside the window to see the seats. He didn't rush or act like he was in a hurry, he just took his time, checking out every little thing. To the salespeople, he looked like some guy who wandered in by mistake. To the customers, he was just another person in the way. Nobody stopped to think, wait a minute, could this be someone special? Now, let's talk about Rick Baxter. Rick was the manager of Elite Motors, and oh boy, did he think he was the king of the castle. He was a loud guy with a big voice that boomed across the room. When he talked, everyone listened, whether they wanted to or not. He wore a shiny tie and a suit that was a little too tight, and he walked around with his chest puffed out like a rooster. Rick thought he knew everything about cars and people. He could spot a rich customer from a mile away, or so he said. If someone walked in with a nice watch or fancy clothes, Rick was all smiles, shaking their hand and offering them coffee. But if someone looked regular, like they didn't have a lot of money, Rick didn't waste his time on them. Nope, not one bit. So, when Rick saw Keanu standing there in his old jacket and scruffy jeans, what do you think he thought? You guessed it, he didn't think much at all. To Rick, Keanu was just some nobody, some guy who didn't belong in a fancy place like Elite Motors. Rick didn't know that Keanu was famous. He didn't know that Keanu had been in big movies and had fans all over the world. He didn't even stop to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this quiet guy had a secret. Rick just saw the cap, the jeans, and the jacket, and he made up his mind right then and there, this guy's not worth my time. Keanu didn't seem to notice Rick staring at him, or maybe he did, but he didn't care. He kept walking around, looking at the cars like they were puzzles he wanted to figure out. He stopped by a silver car with big wheels and bent down to look at the tires. Then he moved to a blue one and checked out the headlights. Every once in a while, he'd nod to himself, like he was thinking hard about something. The salespeople were too busy with other customers to pay him much attention. One of them, a lady named Sarah, glanced over and whispered to her friend, "Who's that guy? He's been here a while." Her friend just shrugged and said, "Probably just dreaming. He doesn't look like he can buy anything." The customers didn't care about Keanu either. A man in a fancy suit bumped into him and didn't even say sorry, he just kept talking on his phone about how much money he had. A lady with a big purse walked right past him, her nose in the air like she was too important to notice anyone else. Everyone in the dealership was caught up in their own little world, buying cars, selling cars, showing off. Nobody stopped to think that this quiet guy in the scruffy clothes might be more than he seemed. Nobody had a clue that something big was about to happen. But here's the thing, something was brewing. You could almost feel it in the air, like the way it feels before a storm rolls in. Keanu wasn't just there to look at cars for fun. He wasn't just some regular dude who wandered in by accident. There was a reason he was at Elite Motors, a big, exciting reason that nobody saw coming. Rick Baxter, with all his loud talking and big ideas, didn't have the tiniest hint of what was going on. The salespeople, running around like ants, didn't know either. Even the rich customers, with their wallets full of money, had no idea. Keanu had a secret, and it was a good one that was going to turn this ordinary day into something wild. What do you think? Was Keanu just there to buy a car like everyone else? Or was something way bigger going on? Maybe he was planning something sneaky, or maybe he had a surprise up his sleeve. Stick around, because this story's about to get really, really good. Imagine you're standing there at Elite Motors, watching it all happen. What would you say to Rick if you knew the truth? Would you whisper, "Hey, you might want to be nice to that guy"? Or would you just sit back and wait for the fun to start? Let's keep going and find out what happens next. Okay, let's slow down and paint the picture a little more, because this moment is where it all begins. Back at Elite Motors, the sun was still shining through the big glass windows, making the cars look even shinier. The red sports car Keanu looked at. It had a big price tag hanging on the mirror, way more money than most people could ever dream of spending. The black truck he touched. It was so tall you'd need a ladder to climb inside. Every car in that place was special, the kind of car you'd see in a movie or a video game. That's why Rick was so proud of his dealership. He'd tell anyone who'd listen, "This isn't just a car lot, it's the best place in town." But Keanu didn't act like he was impressed. He didn't gasp or take pictures or ask a million questions like some people did. He just kept moving from car to car, quiet as a mouse. His cap was pulled so low you could barely see his face, but if you looked close, you might catch a little smile. It was the kind of smile that said, "I know something you don't." And oh boy, did he ever. The secret he was hiding was like a present wrapped up tight, waiting for the perfect moment to be opened. Rick, though. He wasn't smiling. He was watching Keanu from across the room, his arms crossed and his eyebrows scrunched up. He didn't like people who didn't fit his idea of important. To Rick, important people wore fancy clothes and talked loud and flashed their money around. Keanu wasn't doing any of that, so Rick decided he was trouble, or at least, not worth his time. Who does this guy think he is? Rick muttered to himself. He didn't say it loud enough for Keanu to hear, but you could tell he was getting annoyed. The salespeople kept doing their jobs. Sarah, the one who'd noticed Keanu, was helping a man in a green shirt pick out a car. She showed him a white SUV and said, "This one's great for families." The man nodded, but he kept looking over at Keanu, like he was curious too. Another worker, a guy named Mike, was wiping down a yellow car to make it extra shiny. He didn't even glance at Keanu, he was too busy making sure every speck of dust was gone. The whole place was buzzing, full of noise and movement, but Keanu was like a quiet island in the middle of it all. Outside, the parking lot was full of cars, big ones, small ones, old ones, new ones. People drove by on the street, honking their horns or waving at friends. It was a normal day, the kind where nothing crazy usually happens. But inside Elite Motors, things were about to change. Keanu's secret was like a big balloon, getting ready to pop. And when it did, oh, it was going to be awesome. Let's think about this for a second. If you were at Elite Motors that day, what would you do? Would you walk up to Keanu and say, "Hi, do you like cars?" Or would you be like Rick and think, he's not important? Maybe you'd just watch from the side, waiting to see what happens. That's the fun part of the story. Nobody knew what was coming, but it was going to be big. Keanu wasn't just some guy in a cap. He was Keanu Reeves, and he had a plan. What do you think his plan was? Was he going to buy the fanciest car in the place? Or was it something even cooler? Don't go anywhere, because we're just getting started. By now, you're probably wondering, okay, what's the deal with Keanu? And that's the best part of the story, it's a mystery. Back inside, the air smelled like new cars and coffee. Rick had a cup in his hand, sipping it while he watched Keanu like a hawk. The customers kept shopping, pointing at cars and asking questions. "How fast does this one go?" one guy asked. "Does this one come in purple?" a lady wanted to know. The salespeople answered with big smiles, trying to make everyone happy. Keanu, though. He didn't ask anything. He didn't need to. He just kept looking, his hands in his pockets, moving slow and steady. He stopped by a green car with a big engine and tilted his head, like he was thinking hard. Then he walked to a white one and peeked at the dashboard. Every step he took was calm, like he had all the time in the world. But deep down, something was bubbling up, something huge. Rick couldn't take it anymore. He put his coffee down on a desk and started walking over. His shoes clicked on the floor, loud and bossy. You could tell he was ready to say something mean, something to make Keanu leave. The salespeople didn't notice, they were too busy. The customers didn't care, they were too excited about their cars. But Keanu, he was ready. Whatever Rick was about to do, Keanu had something up his sleeve. Something that was going to flip this whole day upside down. Rick Baxter was getting closer now, his loud shoes clicking like a clock counting down to something big. The shiny cars all around Elite Motors seemed to glow even brighter under the afternoon sun pouring through the huge windows. It was one of those days where everything looked perfect on the outside, happy customers, busy workers, fancy cars everywhere. But inside, something was stirring, like a pot of water just about to boil. Keanu Reeves, the guy everyone thought was just some regular dude, was still wandering around, looking at cars like he had a secret mission. And guess what? He did. Rick stopped a few steps away from Keanu, crossing his arms and puffing out his chest again. He looked like a big balloon ready to pop, not because he was scared, but because he was mad. To Rick, this quiet guy in the old jacket and scruffy jeans was messing up his perfect day. "Hey, you," Rick said, his voice loud enough to make a few heads turn. "What's your deal? You've been poking around here for way too long. You buying something, or what?" Keanu didn't jump or look surprised. He just turned his head a little, peeking out from under his baseball cap. His eyes were calm, like a lake with no waves. "I'm just looking," he said, his voice soft but steady. That little answer made Rick's face turn red. "Just looking," Rick repeated, laughing in a mean way. "This isn't a playground, buddy. These cars are for serious buyers, not daydreamers." A couple of salespeople nearby stopped what they were doing and looked over. Sarah, the lady helping the man in the green shirt, raised an eyebrow. She didn't say anything, but you could tell she was curious. Mike, the guy wiping down the yellow car, smirked a little, like he thought Rick was about to win some kind of fight. The customers didn't notice much, they were too busy dreaming about driving their new cars. But Keanu, he didn't argue or get mad. He just nodded once, like he was saying, "Okay, whatever you say," and went back to looking at a big gray SUV. Rick didn't like that one bit. He wanted Keanu to fight back or leave, not just stand there all calm and quiet. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Rick said, stepping even closer. "You think you can just ignore me? I run this place." He pointed at himself with both thumbs, like he was the most important guy in the world. Keanu still didn't say much. He looked up again, gave a tiny smile, and said, "Nice cars you've got here." That was it, just 4 little words. But oh boy, did they make Rick mad. "Nice cars?" Rick snorted. "Yeah, they're nice, too nice for someone like you. Look at you, man. That jacket looks like it came from a dumpster. You couldn't buy a tire around here, let alone a whole car." A few people laughed, some of the salespeople and one customer who was listening in. Sarah didn't laugh, though. She tilted her head, watching Keanu like she was starting to wonder something. Mike kept wiping his car, but he was grinning like this was the funniest thing ever. Keanu didn't fight back. He didn't yell or call Rick names. He just shrugged, like Rick's words were a fly buzzing around his head not worth swatting away. Then he walked over to a shiny silver car with big doors that opened up like wings. He bent down to look at the wheels, running his fingers over the metal. Rick stared at him, his mouth open like he couldn't believe this guy wasn't scared or running away. "You've got 5 minutes, Rick finally said, holding up one hand. 5 minutes to get out, or I'm calling security. We don't need bums like you messing up my dealership." That word bums hung in the air like a bad smell. Sarah frowned a little, like she didn't think it was a nice thing to say. Mike chuckled again, but it was quieter this time. The customers kept doing their thing, but a few of them were starting to watch now, like they could feel something exciting was about to happen. Keanu stood up straight, brushing his hands on his jeans. He looked at Rick for a long moment, his face still calm, and then he said, "Okay. 5 minutes. His voice was so quiet you almost couldn't hear it, but there was something in it, something strong, like a lion hiding under a blanket. Rick turned around and marched back to his desk, muttering under his breath. "Stupid guy thinks he can waste my time," he grumbled, loud enough for everyone to hear. He picked up his coffee cup again, taking a big sip like he'd just won a prize. The salespeople went back to work. Sarah showed the man in the green shirt how the SUV's trunk opened, and Mike kept polishing that yellow car until it sparkled like gold. The customers kept shopping, pointing at this car or that one, dreaming about driving down the road with the wind in their hair. But Keanu, he didn't leave. He didn't run out the door like Rick wanted. He just kept walking around, slow and easy, like he had all the time in the world. He stopped by a black motorcycle parked in the corner, super cool, with shiny chrome parts that gleamed like mirrors. He tilted his head, looking at it like it was a piece of art. Then he moved to a bright orange car with a big engine that growled when you started it. He didn't touch that one. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring like he was thinking hard about something. The clock was ticking. 1 minute went by, then 2. Rick kept glancing over, tapping his foot like he couldn't wait to kick Keanu out. 3 more minutes, he called out, holding up 3 fingers. Keanu didn't answer. He just nodded again, that tiny smile still on his face. Sarah was watching now, pretending to help her customer but really keeping an eye on Keanu. She whispered to herself, "What's he up to?" Mike finished with the yellow car and leaned against it, arms crossed, waiting to see what would happen. The whole dealership felt like a stage, and Keanu was the star of the show, but nobody knew it yet. Outside, the sun was still shining, making the glass windows glow like fire. Cars zoomed by on the street, honking their horns. A kid rode by on a bike, waving at his mom who was parked nearby. Everything outside was normal, just another happy day. But inside Elite Motors, the air was getting thick with something big, something wild. Keanu's 5 minutes were almost up, but he didn't look worried. He didn't look like a guy who was about to get kicked out. He looked like a guy who was exactly where he wanted to be. What do you think was going through Keanu's head? Was he scared of Rick? Nope, not a chance. Was he just messing with him, having a little fun? Maybe. Or was there something way bigger going on, something that would make Rick's jaw drop? Let's imagine you're there, standing by the red sports car, watching it all go down. Would you tell Rick, "Hey, maybe chill out a little"? Or would you grab some popcorn and wait for the fireworks? Because trust me, those fireworks were coming and they were going to be awesome. Back inside, Keanu moved to a big white van with windows all around it. He peeked inside, checking out the seats like he was picturing a family driving it. Rick slammed his coffee cup down on the desk, spilling a little. 2 minutes, he shouted, holding up 2 fingers now. His face was getting redder, like a tomato about to burst. Sarah's customer, the man in the green shirt, looked over and said, "What's that guy's problem?" Sarah just shrugged, but her eyes stayed on Keanu. Mike started laughing again, louder this time, like he couldn't wait to see Rick lose it. The other customers were starting to notice too. A lady with a big hat stopped looking at a purple car and turned to watch. A guy with a beard and sunglasses leaned against a blue truck, smirking like he knew something funny was about to happen. The whole place was buzzing now, not just with the usual car buying stuff, but with this weird feeling that something huge was coming. Keanu didn't care. He didn't rush or panic. He just kept doing his thing, calm as ever, like he was on a Sunday stroll. 1 minute. Rick yelled, jumping up from his chair. He pointed at Keanu like he was a bad dog. "Time's almost up, pal. Don't make me drag you out." Keanu looked over at him, that little smile still there, and said, "Almost done." His voice was so soft, so cool, it was like ice cream on a hot day. Rick blinked, not sure what to say. "Almost done," he repeated, sounding confused. "Done with what?" Keanu didn't answer. He just turned back to the white van, tapping the hood lightly with his fingers. The clock kept ticking, tick, tick, tick. The 5 minutes were almost gone. Rick grabbed his phone, ready to call security. Sarah stopped helping her customer and watched, holding her breath. Mike leaned forward, his grin as big as his face. The customers all turned, eyes wide, waiting. The whole dealership went quiet, like everyone knew something was about to explode. And then it happened. Keanu straightened up, took off his baseball cap, and ran a hand through his hair. He turned to face Rick, and for the first time, everyone could see his face, really see it. A few people gasped. Sarah's mouth dropped open. Mike's grin disappeared. Rick's phone slipped out of his hand and hit the floor with a loud clack. Because right then, in that moment, they all realized something. This wasn't just some regular dude. This was Keanu Reeves. And he wasn't here to buy a car, he was here for something way, way bigger. What do you think happens next? Was Keanu about to tell Rick off? Was he going to laugh and walk away? Or was there an even crazier surprise waiting? Stick around, because this sunny day at Elite Motors is about to turn into the wildest story you've ever heard. We're not done yet, let's keep going and see how this all plays out. Rick Baxter was the kind of guy who walked around like he was the king of everything. His shiny shoes clicked on the floor, and his big voice bounced off the walls of Elite Motors like a ball in a pinball machine. He thought he was the boss not just of the car dealership, but of the whole world. Rick had a big head, even bigger than his loud laugh, and he didn't like waiting for anyone. If you weren't important to him, he didn't care about you one bit. He'd look at you with his squinty eyes and decide right away if you were worth his time or if you were just a nobody he could boss around. That sunny afternoon, Rick was strutting through the dealership, his tie flapping a little as he moved. The cars all around him sparkled, red ones, blue ones, silver ones, all lined up like toys in a store. The lights above made them shine so bright you almost needed sunglasses inside. Salespeople were helping customers, showing them big trucks and fast sports cars, while Rick watched it all like a hawk. He loved being in charge, telling everyone what to do. Move that car over there, he'd yell, or smile more for the customers. He thought he knew everything about who should be in his fancy dealership and who shouldn't. Then he saw Keanu Reeves. Yep, Keanu, the guy from those cool movies, was standing by a sleek black sports car. It was one of the fastest cars in the place, with smooth curves and a shiny hood that looked like a mirror. Keanu wasn't acting like a big shot, though. He had on his plain jacket, scruffy jeans, and that baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. To Rick, he didn't look like a movie star or a rich guy. He looked like some regular person who wandered in by mistake. Keanu was just poking around, running his hand along the car's side, peeking at the wheels, and looking inside like he was curious. Rick stopped strutting. His eyes got small and narrow, like a cat staring at a mouse. He didn't like what he saw, not one bit. To Rick, this guy in the old clothes didn't belong in his shiny, fancy world. Hey, buddy. Rick barked, his voice so loud it made a few people jump. This isn't a museum, you know. You gonna buy something, or are you just here to waste my time? He crossed his arms and stood tall, waiting for Keanu to say something. Keanu didn't jump or look scared. He didn't even blink. He just turned his head a little and gave a small smile, like he wasn't bothered at all. I'm just looking, he said, his voice soft and quiet, like a whisper on the wind. That little smile was friendly, but Rick didn't care. He wasn't in the mood for friendly, he was in the mood to show everyone who was boss. Just looking. Rick snorted, laughing in a mean way that sounded like a pig sniffing around. You don't look like you can afford a hubcap, buddy, let alone one of these beauties. He waved his hand at the black sports car, like it was a prize only special people could touch. A few salespeople nearby heard Rick and giggled. One of them, a guy named Mike, was wiping down a yellow car with a rag. He snickered and shook his head, like he thought Rick was super funny. Another worker, a lady named Sarah, was helping a customer but peeked over with a little grin. Some customers heard too, they glanced at Keanu and smirked, like they agreed with Rick. Yeah, look at that guy, one man whispered to his friend, pointing with his chin. He doesn't fit here. Everyone seemed to think Rick was right, that Keanu was just some poor guy who didn't belong. But Keanu. He didn't get mad. He didn't yell back or stomp his feet. He just stayed calm, like a tree standing still in a storm. That small smile stayed on his face, and his eyes, oh, those eyes had a little sparkle in them. It was like he knew something Rick didn't, something big and exciting. You could almost see it flickering behind his quiet look, like a fire starting to grow. Rick didn't notice, though. He was too busy laughing and puffing out his chest, thinking he'd won already. He had no idea, no clue at all, that he was digging his own grave with every word he said. Rick kept going. Seriously, man, he said, stepping closer to Keanu. What's your deal? You think you can just walk in here and touch my cars like you own the place? He pointed at the black sports car and then at Keanu, his finger wagging like a teacher scolding a kid. These are for real customers, people with money. Not some guy who looks like he slept in a barn. Mike laughed again, louder this time, and Sarah's grin got bigger. A customer with a fancy watch chuckled too, shaking his head like Keanu was a joke. Keanu didn't say much. He just nodded a little, like he was listening but not worried. Nice car, he said, pointing at the black one. His voice was still soft, still calm, like he was talking about the weather. Rick blinked, surprised for a second, then laughed even harder. Nice car? Oh, that's rich, he said, slapping his knee. You wouldn't know a nice car if it ran you over. Why don't you take your looking somewhere else, huh? Like a junkyard, maybe that's more your speed. The salespeople kept snickering. Mike put down his rag and crossed his arms, watching like this was a show on TV. Sarah turned away from her customer for a moment, giggling behind her hand. The customers nearby were all in on it now. One lady with a big purse whispered, "What a loser," to her friend, and they both laughed. Everyone thought Rick was the big winner, putting this quiet guy in his place. They didn't see that Keanu's calm face wasn't weak, it was strong, like a rock that doesn't move no matter how hard you push it. Have you ever met someone like Rick? Someone who looks at you and decides right away if you're good enough? Maybe at school, there's a kid who thinks they're better than everyone because they have cool shoes or a fancy backpack. Or maybe you've seen a grown-up act like they're the boss of the world, judging people too fast without even asking their name. Rick was that guy. He thought he could tell everything about Keanu just by looking at his old jacket and scruffy jeans. But boy, was he wrong. Keanu didn't fight back, not yet. He just kept standing there, hands in his pockets, looking at the black sports car like it was his best friend. Rick's words bounced off him like rain on a window. They didn't stick, didn't hurt. But that little sparkle in Keanu's eyes? It was getting brighter. It was like he was holding a secret, a really good one, and he wasn't ready to share it yet. Rick didn't see it. He was too busy talking loud and acting big. "I'm giving you one chance," Rick said, holding up one finger. "Get out now, or I'll make you sorry you ever walked in here." The air in Elite Motors got heavy, like before a big rain. The salespeople stopped laughing and watched closer. Sarah tilted her head, like she was starting to wonder if Rick was right. Mike leaned against the yellow car, his grin fading a little. The customers stopped whispering and stared, waiting to see what would happen. Everyone could feel it. Something was building, something tense. Rick thought he was in control, but Keanu's quiet strength was like a wave getting ready to crash. Keanu looked at Rick, that small smile still there. "Okay," he said, simple as that. He didn't argue, didn't shout. He just turned back to the car and ran his hand along the hood one more time, like he was saying goodbye to a pet. Rick snorted again. "Yeah, that's right, go on, get lost," he said, waving his hand like he was shooing a fly. He turned around and strutted back toward his desk, thinking he'd won the day. "What a clown," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mike laughed one more time, and Sarah shook her head, going back to her customer. But Keanu didn't leave. He didn't walk out the big glass doors like Rick wanted. He just moved over to another car, a big blue truck with shiny wheels, and started looking at that one too. Rick didn't see it right away. He was too busy sipping his coffee and smirking to himself. But Sarah noticed. She peeked over her customer's shoulder and whispered to herself, "He's not going anywhere." Mike saw it too and stopped leaning on the yellow car, his eyes getting wide. The customers started murmuring again, like, "What's that guy doing now?" Rick finally turned around and saw Keanu still there. His face went redder than a stop sign. "Hey," he yelled, slamming his coffee cup down so hard it splashed on his desk. "I told you to get out? You deaf or just stupid?" He marched back over, his shoes clicking faster this time, like he was ready to explode. Keanu didn't move. He just kept looking at the blue truck, calm as ever, like Rick's yelling was just background noise. The tension was thick now, like when you're waiting for a balloon to pop. Everyone in the dealership was watching. Sarah put down her clipboard, her customer forgotten. Mike stepped closer, his rag hanging limp in his hand. The lady with the big purse gasped, and the man with the fancy watch pulled out his phone, like he might record this. Rick was in Keanu's face now, pointing and shouting. "You're done, buddy. I'm calling security right now, you're outta here." Keanu looked up at Rick, slow and easy. That sparkle in his eyes was shining bright now, like a star you can't miss. "No need," he said, his voice still soft but strong, like a river running deep. Rick stopped, his finger still in the air, his mouth open. "What?" he said, confused. Keanu smiled, a real smile this time, not just a little one. "I said no need," he repeated. And then he added, "I'm not going anywhere." Rick blinked, his big ego shrinking a tiny bit. Sarah's eyes got big. Mike dropped his rag. The customers all leaned in, holding their breath. Something was happening, something big. Rick didn't know it yet, but he just pushed the wrong guy. Keanu wasn't just some regular dude in scruffy jeans. He was Keanu Reeves, and he had a secret that was about to turn Rick's world upside down. What do you think that secret was? Was Keanu about to fight back, or was he holding something even better? Let's keep going, this is getting good. The next few minutes at Elite Motors felt like a tight tug-of-war game. You know that feeling when you're pulling a rope, and it's super tense because you don't know who's going to win? That's what it was like inside the fancy car dealership. Rick Baxter, the loudmouth manager, was still acting like he was the biggest, toughest guy around. He kept throwing mean words at Keanu Reeves, trying to show everyone how cool and in charge he was. "We've got real customers to help," Rick said, his voice booming like a drum. He pointed at the big glass doors with a big, bossy finger. "Why don't you take your window shopping somewhere else, huh?" Keanu didn't fight back. He didn't yell or make a fuss. He just gave a little nod like a tiny okay and turned toward the door. His sneakers squeaked a bit on the shiny floor as he walked out, his old jacket swinging a little. To Rick, it looked like he'd won. Keanu was leaving, just like Rick wanted. But here's where things get juicy, really, really interesting. As Keanu stepped outside into the sunny parking lot, he didn't just keep walking away like some sad puppy. Nope. He stopped, pulled out his phone from his pocket, and made a quick call. His voice was super low, so quiet that nobody inside could hear a single word. But if you looked really close, you'd see his lips curl up into a tiny grin. Oh yeah, something sneaky was going on. Back inside, Rick was puffing out his chest like a proud peacock. He turned to his team of salespeople, who were all standing around watching, and grinned like he'd just hit a home run. "See that?" he said, clapping his hands together loud enough to make a bang. "That's how you handle freeloaders. You don't let 'em hang around, messing up the place. Out they go." The salespeople laughed. Well, most of them did. Mike, the guy who'd been wiping the yellow car, chuckled and nodded, like Rick was his hero. Sarah, the lady helping a customer earlier, giggled too, but it was a quieter giggle, like she wasn't totally sure. The customers nearby smiled and went back to looking at cars, thinking Rick had saved the day. But not everyone was laughing. There was one guy, a young salesman named Tim, who didn't look so happy. Tim was newer at Elite Motors. He had messy brown hair and big, curious eyes, like a kid who asks a lot of questions. While everyone else was clapping for Rick, Tim frowned. He scratched his head and stepped closer to Rick, his voice a little shaky. "I don't know, boss," Tim said, looking at the door where Keanu had just left. "That guy didn't seem like a nobody to me." Rick stopped laughing and turned to Tim, his eyebrows shooting up like they were surprised. "What?" he said, sounding annoyed. "Are you kidding me, kid?" He waved his hand in the air, like he was swatting away a silly idea. "Trust me, Tim, I've been doing this a long time. I can spot a broke loser from a mile away. That guy." Rick pointed at the door again, his voice getting loud again. "He's got nothing, no money, no class, nada. He's probably out there begging for change right now." The other salespeople laughed again. Mike slapped Tim on the back and said, "Don't worry about it, newbie. Boss knows best." Sarah nodded, but her eyes flicked to the window, like she was wondering about something. Tim didn't laugh, though. He just stood there, his frown getting deeper, like he wasn't so sure Rick was right. And oh boy, Rick had no idea how wrong he was. That guy he just kicked out? That was Keanu Reeves? Not some broke loser, not some nobody, but a famous guy with a big secret. And that phone call? It was the start of something wild. Outside, Keanu was standing by a big tree in the parking lot. The sun was shining bright, making his old jacket look even scruffier next to all the shiny cars parked around him. He held the phone to his ear, talking in that low, quiet voice. Nobody inside could hear him, not Rick, not Tim, not anyone. The wind blew a little, rustling the leaves on the tree, but Keanu didn't move. He just kept talking, that tiny grin still on his face. What do you think he was saying? Was he calling a friend to complain about Rick? Was he ordering a pizza just to mess with everyone? Or was it something way bigger, something that would make Rick wish he'd kept his big mouth shut? Keep guessing, because it's about to get good. Back inside, Rick was still bragging. He walked over to his desk, where his coffee cup was sitting, and picked it up like it was a trophy. That's how you run a dealership, he said, taking a big sip. You keep the riffraff out and let the real money come in. He spun around in his chair, grinning at his team. Who's got a sale for me? Let's make some cash today. Mike raised his hand and said, I've got a guy looking at the yellow car, might buy it soon. Sarah chimed in, my customer likes the white SUV. We're almost done. Rick clapped again. That's what I like to hear. Real customers, real money. Tim didn't say anything. He just stood by the window, peeking out at Keanu. He couldn't hear the phone call, but he saw that little grin. Something's up, Tim muttered to himself, so quiet nobody else heard. He didn't know who Keanu was, not yet, but he had a feeling, like when you know a storm's coming even though the sky's still blue. Rick didn't notice Tim watching. He was too busy strutting around again, telling everyone how smart he was. I've got an eye for people, he said, tapping his head. I can tell who's got it and who doesn't. That guy. He didn't have it. Outside, Keanu hung up the phone. He slid it back into his pocket and looked at the dealership through the big glass windows. That tiny grin turned into a bigger one, just a little bigger, but enough to make you wonder. Then he started walking, not away, but around the side of the building, like he was heading somewhere sneaky. The sun bounced off the cars in the parking lot, making everything look extra bright, but Keanu didn't rush. He moved slow and calm, like a cat sneaking up on a bird. Whatever he'd said on that phone call, it was starting something Rick wasn't ready for. Inside, the minutes ticked by. Rick kept talking, kept bragging, kept acting like he'd won a gold medal. You've gotta be tough in this business, he told his team. Can't let every random guy waste your time. That's why I'm the boss. Mike nodded like a puppy, and Sarah smiled, but Tim kept watching out the window. Keanu was gone now, out of sight, but Tim's frown stayed. He didn't look mad, Tim said to himself. He looked happy. Why? A few more minutes passed. The dealership was buzzing again, customers asking questions, salespeople showing off cars, Rick sipping his coffee like a king on a throne. Then something happened. A black car pulled into the parking lot, a fancy one, with dark windows you couldn't see through. It stopped right by the front door, and a man in a suit stepped out. He had a briefcase in his hand, and he looked serious, like a teacher about to give a big test. Tim saw him first and tapped Sarah on the shoulder. Who's that? He asked, pointing. Sarah looked out and shrugged. Dunno. Maybe a big customer. The man in the suit walked toward the door, his shoes clicking on the pavement. Rick didn't see him yet, he was too busy telling Mike a story about another freeloader he'd kicked out last week. Same thing happened, Rick was saying. Guy comes in, no money, just looking, I sent him packing. Mike laughed, but Tim and Sarah were watching the man in the suit. He pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, his face all business. The air in the dealership changed, like when you feel a cold breeze before rain. Something was coming. Rick finally noticed. He turned around, saw the man in the suit, and put on his big, fake smile. Hey there, he said, walking over fast. Welcome to Elite Motors. Looking for a car today? We've got the best ones around. The man didn't smile back. He just held up his briefcase and said, I'm here on business. Where's the manager? Rick puffed out his chest even more. That's me. Rick Baxter, at your service. What can I do for you? The man in the suit opened his briefcase and pulled out some papers. I'm with the ownership group, he said, his voice flat and serious. We've got some changes to talk about. Rick's smile froze. Changes, he said, blinking. What kind of changes? The man didn't answer right away. He just handed Rick the papers and said, "You'll see." Tim's eyes got big. Sarah whispered, "What's going on?" Mike stopped laughing and stepped closer, trying to peek at the papers. The customers all turned to watch, sensing something big. Rick looked at the papers, his face going from red to white in 2 seconds flat. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice getting shaky. "This says, new owner? What's that mean?" The man in the suit straightened up. "It means Elite Motors has been sold. The new owner takes over today." Rick's mouth dropped open. "Sold? To who?" he asked, his loud voice turning into a squeak. The man in the suit didn't answer. He just looked toward the door. And right then, guess who walked back in? Keanu Reeves? Yep, Keanu, with his scruffy jeans and that tiny grin, strolled right back into the dealership like he owned it. Because spoiler alert, he did. Rick didn't get it yet. He stared at Keanu, then at the papers, then back at Keanu. "What's he doing here?" Rick snapped, pointing. The man in the suit cleared his throat. "That's the new owner," he said, nodding at Keanu. "Mr. Reeves bought the place this morning." The room went quiet, super quiet, like when you drop a pin and everyone hears it. Tim gasped. Sarah's jaw dropped. Mike's eyes bugged out like a cartoon. The customers all froze, staring at Keanu. And Rick? His face looked like a tomato that got stepped on, red, messy, and totally shocked. Keanu just stood there, hands in his pockets, that grin still on his face. What do you think Keanu was planning on that phone call now? Told you it was big. Rick thought he was kicking out a nobody, but he just messed with the guy who owned everything. How's that for a twist? Stick around, because this story's about to get even wilder. About 20 minutes after Keanu Reeves walked out of Elite Motors, something big was about to happen. The dealership was buzzing like a beehive, salespeople helping customers, cars shining under bright lights, and Rick Baxter still acting like he was the king of the castle. Rick was in the middle of telling a story, waving his coffee cup around like it was a magic wand. "So I said to the guy, 'Get out of here,'" he laughed, his loud voice bouncing off the walls. Everyone was listening or pretending to when suddenly, the big glass doors swung open with a loud whoosh. Heads turned fast, like kids spotting candy at a party. And guess who walked in? Keanu Reeves? But this time, Keanu didn't look like the same guy. Nope, not at all. That scruffy baseball cap was gone, tossed away like an old toy. Now he wore a sharp, cool jacket, black and shiny, like something a movie star would wear. On top of his head, a pair of sunglasses sat like a crown, catching the light. His walk was different too, not slow and quiet like before, but strong and sure, like he owned the whole world. Every step he took made a little click on the shiny floor, and people couldn't stop staring. Behind him came a nervous-looking man in a suit, holding a briefcase tight, like it was full of treasure. His tie was crooked, and his eyes darted around like he wasn't sure what was happening. Rick froze right where he stood. His coffee cup was halfway to his mouth, stuck in the air like someone hit pause on a video. His big, loud voice stopped mid-sentence, and his eyes got wide, like two big moons. He didn't know what to say or do. He just stared at Keanu, blinking fast. The whole room got quiet for a second, like everyone was holding their breath. Keanu walked right up to Rick, stopping so close you could almost hear Rick's heart pounding. "Rick, right?" Keanu said, his voice calm but strong, like a river flowing steady. "I think we need to talk." Rick blinked again, his coffee cup shaking a little in his hand. Who are you?" he stammered, his words tripping over each other like clumsy feet. He sounded unsure now, not like the big boss he'd been acting like all day. Keanu's smile grew bigger, not a tiny grin this time, but a real, wide smile that showed his teeth. "Me," he said, pointing at himself with one finger. "I'm the guy who just bought this place. You know, the new owner." Boom. That hit like a thunderclap. The room went dead silent, no talking, no laughing, nothing. You could hear a pin drop on that shiny floor. Rick's face turned white as a ghost, like all the color ran away and hid. His coffee cup slipped a little, almost spilling, but he didn't even notice. The man in the suit stepped forward, looking nervous but trying to stay calm. He held up a stack of papers from his briefcase, waving them like a flag. It's official, he said, his voice a little shaky. Mr. Reeves signed a deal this morning. He owns Elite Motors now. Can you imagine that moment? It was like a giant bomb went off, but instead of noise, it was shock exploding everywhere. Rick's jaw dropped so low it looked like it might hit the floor. His eyes bugged out, big and round, like he'd just seen a UFO land right in front of him. The salespeople Mike, Sarah, and Tim all froze too, staring at Keanu like he'd turned into a superhero. Mike's rag fell out of his hand and plopped on the ground. Sarah's clipboard slipped a little, and Tim's mouth hung open like a fish out of water. Even the customers stopped what they were doing. Looking at cars didn't matter anymore. They all turned to watch, whispering to each other, "Did he say owner?" Keanu didn't stop there. He leaned in close to Rick, so close their noses almost touched. His voice got quieter, but it was still strong, like a lion growling low. "Oh, and Rick," he said, pausing just long enough to make Rick squirm. "You're done kicking people out of my dealership. How's that for a twist?" Rick's big, mean ego popped like a balloon with a pin in it. He'd been so loud, so bossy, telling Keanu to get lost, but now Keanu was the one in charge, and Rick didn't know what to do. The air in Elite Motors felt thick, like jelly you could scoop with a spoon. Everyone was still staring, waiting to see what would happen next. Rick tried to talk, but his words got all jumbled up. Wait, what, he sputtered, sounding like a broken toy. His coffee cup finally slipped out of his shaky hand and hit the floor with a splash. Brown liquid went everywhere, but Rick didn't even look down. He was too busy staring at Keanu, trying to figure out how this scruffy guy in jeans was now his boss. The man in the suit cleared his throat and held the papers higher, like he wanted everyone to see. "It's all here," he said, tapping the stack with his finger. "Mr. Reeves bought the dealership this morning. The old owner signed it over, and he's taking over right now today." He looked at Keanu, then at Rick, then back at Keanu, like he wasn't sure who to talk to. Keanu just nodded at him, cool as ice, and turned back to Rick. "Yep," Keanu said. "That's me. New owner. New rules." The salespeople couldn't believe it. Mike shook his head, muttering, "No way, no way." Sarah blinked fast, like she was waking up from a dream. "He's the owner," she whispered to Tim. Tim nodded, his big eyes shining. "Told you he wasn't a nobody," he said, grinning like he'd won a prize. The customers started buzzing too, talking to each other, pointing at Keanu. "That's Keanu Reeves," one lady gasped, tugging her friend's arm. "The movie guy," her friend said, squinting. "No way." But it was him, and he wasn't just a movie guy anymore, he was their boss. Rick's brain was spinning like a top. He took a step back, almost tripping over his own feet. You bought this place," he said, his voice squeaky now, not loud and bossy like before. "But you were just..." "I thought..." He couldn't finish his sentences, too many thoughts were crashing together in his head. Keanu tilted his head a little, like he was having fun watching Rick squirm. "You thought I was some broke guy, right?" Keanu said. "Some freeloader you could kick out." Rick's face went even whiter, if that was possible. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, like a fish trying to breathe. I didn't know," he finally said, throwing his hands up. "You were in those old clothes. You didn't say anything." Keanu laughed, a small, happy laugh that made everyone else smile too. "Didn't need to," he said. "I wanted to see how you treat people. And now I know." Boom again. That was like a second bomb dropping. Rick's big, mean words from before, calling Keanu a bum, telling him to get lost, came back to bite him hard. The salespeople gasped. Sarah covered her mouth, like she couldn't believe it. Mike gulped, looking at the floor where his rag was still sitting. Tim clapped his hands together once, laughing quietly. He tricked him. Tim whispered to Sarah. He wanted to see what Rick would do. The customers were loving it too. "Oh, he got him good," the lady with the big purse said, giggling. "Serves him right," the man with the fancy watch added, nodding. Everyone could see it now. Keanu wasn't just here to buy a car or mess around. He'd walked in all quiet and scruffy on purpose, testing Rick, seeing if he'd be mean or nice. And Rick? He'd failed that test big time. The man in the suit shuffled his papers, looking nervous again. Uh, Mr. Reeves, he said, should I go over the details now? Keanu waved a hand, like he didn't care about that yet. Later, he said, still looking at Rick. Right now, I've got something to say. He turned to face everyone, the salespeople, the customers, everyone in the whole dealership. This place is mine now, he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. And things are gonna change. No more judging people by their clothes. No more kicking people out just because you don't like their look. We're gonna treat everyone right starting today. Rick's knees wobbled a little, like he might fall over. But I didn't mean, he started, but Keanu held up a hand to stop him. You meant it, Keanu said, his voice firm. You said I didn't belong here. But guess what? I do. And you're the one who's gotta answer for it now. Rick's eyes darted around, looking for help, but nobody jumped in. Mike stared at his shoes. Sarah bit her lip. Tim just watched, his grin getting bigger. The room was still buzzing with shock. Customers pulled out their phones, snapping pictures of Keanu standing there in his sharp jacket, sunglasses on his head, looking like a boss. This is crazy, one guy said, laughing. I'm telling everyone about this, a lady added, typing fast on her screen. The man in the suit stood there with his briefcase, waiting for Keanu to tell him what to do next. But Keanu wasn't done with Rick yet. So, Rick, Keanu said, crossing his arms. You like being the big guy, huh? Telling people what to do. Rick nodded a little, then shook his head, then nodded again. He didn't know what to say. Well, Keanu went on, let's see how you like it when I'm the one giving orders. Because this is my dealership now, and I don't like bullies. That word bullies hit hard. Rick flinched, like someone poked him with a stick. He'd been mean to Keanu, thinking he was better than him, but now the tables were turned all the way around. Keanu was the boss, and Rick was just a guy with a coffee stain on his shirt, standing there looking silly. The salespeople didn't know whether to laugh or hide. The customers were eating it up, loving every second of this big reveal. What do you think that moment felt like? Picture it, Rick, all big and loud one minute, then small and quiet the next. Keanu, calm and scruffy before, now strong and in charge. It was like a movie scene, but it was real. Rick's jaw was still on the floor, the salespeople were still staring, and Keanu was standing tall, ready to take over. How's that for a twist? It's not over yet, either. Let's see what happens next when Keanu starts running the show. The air in Elite Motors was buzzing like a beehive after Keanu Reeves dropped the big news he was the new owner. Rick Baxter, the loudmouth manager who'd been so mean, stood there with his face all white and his mouth flapping open like a fish. He knew he'd messed up big time. He'd just tried to kick out the guy who now owned the whole dealership, and everyone could see he was in trouble. Rick's coffee was still spilled on the floor, making a little puddle, but he didn't care about that anymore. He was too busy trying to save himself. Wait, Mr. Reeves, sir. Rick said fast, his voice all shaky and high, like a kid caught sneaking cookies. He held up his hands, waving them around like he could push the trouble away. I didn't know I was just I didn't mean it. He stumbled over his words, tripping like he'd tripped over his own feet earlier. His big, bossy attitude was gone now, shrunk down to nothing. He looked at Keanu with big, scared eyes, hoping for a way out. But Keanu wasn't buying it. He stood tall in his sharp jacket, sunglasses on his head, looking strong and calm like a superhero. He shook his head a little and cut Rick off before he could keep babbling. You judged me before you even asked my name, Keanu said, his voice steady and clear, like a teacher explaining something important. You didn't care who I was, you just saw my old clothes and decided I wasn't good enough. That's not how we're running things here anymore. Rick's mouth opened again, but no words came out this time. He just blinked fast, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Keanu turned to the man in the suit, the nervous guy with the briefcase who'd brought the papers. Make sure Rick's out by the end of the day, Keanu said, pointing at Rick but not even looking at him. His voice was firm, like a door slamming shut. The man in the suit nodded quick, clutching his briefcase tighter. Yes, sir, Mr. Reeves, he said, scribbling something on a little notepad. I'll take care of it. The whole staff watched in shock, their eyes big and round like dinner plates. Nobody moved for a second. It was like time stopped. Rick's face went from white to red, then back to white again. Out, he squeaked, his voice so tiny you could barely hear it. You mean, like, gone? For good? Keanu didn't answer, he just crossed his arms and stared at Rick, letting him figure it out. The man in the suit stepped closer to Rick and said, "You heard him. End of the day. Let's go get your stuff." Rick didn't know what to do. He looked around, hoping someone would help him, maybe Mike or Sarah or one of the customers. But nobody said a word. Mike stared at the floor, kicking at his dropped rag with his shoe. Sarah hugged her clipboard tight, her lips pressed together like she was trying not to smile. Tim, the young guy with the messy hair, grinned ear to ear. He'd been right about Keanu all along. The customers whispered to each other, some giggling, some shaking their heads. Rick was all alone now, and he knew it. He started grabbing his stuff, moving slow like he didn't want to believe it was real. He picked up his coffee mug from the desk, the one that didn't have coffee in it anymore, and shoved it into a little box. "This is crazy," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't know. How was I supposed to know?" He looked like a bum. He grabbed a pen, a stack of papers, and a little plant he kept on his desk, tossing them all in the box like a kid packing up toys. "I've been here for years," he said, his voice getting louder. "Years. And now this." Keanu didn't say anything. He just watched, calm and cool, letting Rick ramble. The man in the suit stood by the door, tapping his foot like he was in a hurry. "Come on, Mr. Baxter," he said. "Let's move it along." Rick shot him a mean look but kept packing. He mumbled more excuses. "It's not fair, and I was just doing my job." But nobody cared. The salespeople stayed quiet, and the customers kept watching, some pulling out their phones to take pictures of Rick shuffling around like a lost puppy. Finally, Rick picked up his box and headed for the door. His shiny shoes dragged on the floor, not clicking loud like before. He looked back at Keanu one last time, his eyes all sad and mad mixed together. "You can't do this," he said, but it sounded weak, like he didn't even believe it himself. Keanu just shrugged, like it was no big deal. "I already did," he said, simple as that. Rick's shoulders slumped, and he shuffled out the big glass doors, the box rattling in his arms. The doors swung shut behind him with a loud thud, and just like that, he was gone. The dealership was quiet for a second, super quiet, like after a big storm passes. Then Keanu turned to the staff. He clapped his hands once, loud and sharp, making everyone jump a little. "Okay, everybody," he said, his voice strong but friendly. "Come over here, I've got something to say." The salespeople, Mike, Sarah, Tim, and a few others, walked over slow, like they weren't sure what to expect. The customers stayed where they were, watching from the sides, still whispering about what just happened. Keanu stood in the middle of the room, right by that sleek black sports car he'd been looking at earlier. He looked at all the faces staring back at him, some nervous, some excited, and smiled a little. "From now on," he said, "we're doing things different here at Elite Motors. No more being mean to people who walk in. No more judging them by their clothes or their shoes or anything like that. We treat everyone who comes in here with respect. You never know who they might be." He paused for a second, letting that sink in. The staff nodded, some fast, some slow. Mike rubbed the back of his neck, like he felt bad for laughing at Rick's mean jokes earlier. Sarah smiled a tiny bit, nodding like she liked the new rules. Tim's grin got even bigger. He was practically bouncing on his toes. "I knew it," he whispered to Sarah. "I knew he was cool." Keanu heard him and gave Tim a little wink, like they were buddies now. The employees started clapping, first just a few, then more, until the whole room was full of noise. It wasn't loud like Rick's yelling, it was happy, like kids cheering at a game. "Yeah," Mike said, clapping hard. "New boss, new way." Sarah joined in, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Even the customers clapped a little, smiling like they were part of something special. Keanu raised a hand to quiet them down, still smiling that calm, cool smile. "Look," he said, "I came in here today to see what this place was really like. I didn't tell anyone who I was because I wanted the truth. And I saw it. Rick was mean, and that's not okay. But you all," he pointed at the staff, "you've got a chance to do better. Let's make this dealership a place where everyone feels good, whether they're buying a car or just looking." Tim piped up, his voice loud and excited. I liked you from the start, Mr. Reeves, he said. I told Rick you weren't a nobody. Everyone laughed, even Keanu, and Tim's face turned a little red, but he kept grinning. Call me Keanu, Keanu said to him. No Mr. Reeves stuff, just Keanu. Tim nodded fast, like that was the best thing he'd ever heard. The man in the suit stepped forward again, holding his briefcase like a shield. Keanu, he said, I've got the paperwork ready whenever you want to. Keanu waved him off. Later, he said. Right now, I want to talk to my team. The man nodded and stepped back, fiddling with his tie. Keanu looked around at the staff again. Anyone got questions? He asked. Sarah raised her hand, shy at first. Are we gonna get in trouble for what Rick did? She asked. Keanu shook his head. Nope, he said. That was Rick's mess, not yours. You're all starting fresh with me. Sarah smiled big, like a weight lifted off her shoulders. Mike raised his hand next. What about sales? Do we still have to push so hard? Keanu thought for a second, then said, sell cars, sure, but don't trick people. Be honest. They'll come back if they trust you. Mike nodded, like that made sense. The customers were still watching, some coming closer now. Can we meet you? A lady with a big hat asked, holding up her phone. Keanu laughed. Sure, he said. Stick around, I'll say hi after I'm done here. The lady clapped her hands, excited, and the other customers started chattering again, snapping more pictures. Justice was served big time. Rick was gone, out the door with his box of stuff, muttering excuses nobody cared about. He'd been mean and bossy, thinking he could judge people however he wanted, but Keanu showed him up. Now Elite Motors had a new boss, a cool one who wasn't messing around. The staff felt it, the customers saw it, and even the air seemed lighter, like a cloudy day turning sunny. Keanu walked over to the black sports car and patted it, like it was an old friend. This place is ours now, he said to the team. Let's make it good. They nodded, some still clapping, some just smiling. Tim kept grinning ear to ear. He'd been right all along, and now he had a boss he really liked. Rick's big ego was history, and Keanu's new rules were the future. How's that for a happy ending to a wild day? And just like that, one ordinary day at Elite Motors turned into a big, unforgettable lesson for everybody there. It started out so normal, sun shining, cars sparkling, people shopping, but then Keanu Reeves walked in and flipped everything upside down. Nobody saw it coming, especially not Rick Baxter, the loud manager who thought he knew it all. Rick was so sure Keanu was just some regular guy in scruffy clothes, someone he could boss around and kick out. But Keanu proved him wrong, super wrong. He wasn't just some guy. He was the new owner, the one calling the shots, and he showed everyone that the person you least expect might be the most important one in the room. Think about that for a second. Keanu didn't look big or loud or fancy when he walked in. He had on an old jacket, scruffy jeans, and a cap pulled low. He was quiet, walking around, just looking at cars like anybody else. Nobody thought he could be the boss, not Rick, not the salespeople, not even the customers. But he was. He had a huge secret hiding under that cap, and when he showed it, wow, did it change everything. Rick's big, mean words crumbled like a sandcastle when the waves hit, and Keanu stood tall, proving that looks don't tell the whole story. So, here's something to think about next time you're out in the world. Maybe you see someone quiet, sitting by themselves, not making a fuss. Or maybe you spot someone in old clothes, not looking fancy or loud. What do you think about them? Do you decide right away they're not important, like Rick did? Or do you stop and wonder, hey, maybe they're hiding something huge? Because that's what Keanu taught everyone at Elite Motors, you never know who someone really is until you give them a chance. They could be a superhero, a boss, or just someone really cool, and you'd miss it if you judge too fast. What's the big lesson here, the moral of this crazy story? It's simple, don't judge a book by its cover. You know how books work, right? The outside might look plain or boring, but inside, the pages could be full of wild adventures or big surprises. People are like that too. Keanu's cover was scruffy and quiet, but his story was amazing. He owned the whole dealership. If Rick had taken 2 seconds to talk to him instead of yelling, he might still have his job. But nope, he judged fast, and the ending surprised him big time. So, next time you meet someone, Don't just look at the outside, peek inside a little. You might be shocked at what you find. Hey, let's talk about that twist for a minute. What did you think? Wasn't it wild when Keanu walked back in, all cool and strong, and said, "I'm the owner"? I bet your jaw dropped just like Rick's did. Imagine being there, standing by those shiny cars, watching it all happen. Would you have kicked Keanu out like Rick did, thinking he didn't belong? Or would you have seen through Rick's nonsense, like Tim did, and thought, "Hey, this guy's got something special"? Tell me what you think. Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your ideas. And while you're at it, tell me this: have you ever met someone who surprised you like Keanu did? Maybe a quiet kid at school turned out to be super smart, or someone shy ended up being really brave. Stories like that happen all the time, and they're so cool. Share yours with me, I'm all ears. Oh, and one more thing, where are you reading this from today? Are you at home, at school, or maybe somewhere fun? Let me know. I love picturing you all out there. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole wild ride at Elite Motors. It started with a sunny day and ended with a big lesson, and I hope you had fun reading it. If you loved this story, if that twist made you giggle or cheer, hit that subscribe button right now. I've got more stories like this, full of surprises and cool moments, and I'd hate for you to miss them. Every time you come back, we'll dive into something new that'll keep you guessing what's gonna happen next. Who's gonna surprise us? It's gonna be awesome. Let's keep that lesson from Keanu in our heads, okay? Don't judge people too fast, give them a chance to show who they really are. You might meet someone amazing, someone who changes everything, just like Keanu did. He walked in quiet, but he left loud, not with yelling, but with power and kindness. That's the kind of person we can all try to be, right? Look past the outside, find the good stuff inside, and maybe even surprise a few people ourselves. So, what's next for Elite Motors? Keanu's in charge now, and Rick's gone with his box of stuff. The salespeople are clapping, the customers are snapping pictures, and the cars are still shining bright. It's a brand new day there, and it's all because one guy showed up and turned a regular afternoon into something nobody will forget. That's the power of not judging too quick. It can flip the world around and make it better. Imagine if you were Keanu for a day. What would you do? Would you walk into a place all quiet, then surprise everyone with something big? Maybe you'd show up at school in your regular clothes, then tell everyone you're secretly a genius or a secret prince. How fun would that be? Or maybe you'd just be nice to someone nobody else notices, like Keanu wants his team to do. That's a cool way to live, making people smile instead of pushing them away. This story's got me thinking about all the times I've seen people get judged too fast. Like, one time at school, there was this kid who didn't talk much. Everyone thought he was weird, but then he won a big art contest. His drawings were amazing. Nobody saw that coming, just like nobody saw Keanu's big secret. It's funny how life works that way. Surprises are everywhere if you look for them. So, let's make a deal, you and me. Next time we see someone who doesn't look important, let's think twice. Let's wonder, what's their story, instead of deciding they're not cool. Who knows? They might be the next Keanu Reeves, ready to take over and make everything awesome. And if we're wrong, if they're just regular people, that's okay too. Being nice never hurts, right? It's like Keanu said, treat everyone with respect, because you never know who they might be. Thanks again for reading, friends. You're the best for sticking with me all the way to the end. This story's done, but there's more. Where it came from, more twists, more fun, more lessons. Hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the good times going. What did you love most about Keanu's big moment? Was it Rick's shocked face, or Keanu's cool new rules? Tell me everything, I can't wait to hear. And one last thing before I go, be like Keanu. Walk into your day calm and kind, but ready to surprise the world if you need to. You've got your own secret power inside, everyone does. Maybe it's being funny, or smart, or brave. Whatever it is, don't let anyone judge you out of it. Show it off when the time's right, and watch the jaws drop. See you next time for more stories that'll keep you guessing. Bye for now.